Book 1 Section 3. For all the Eurovision Song Contests I remember Benny fucking Colvin. Fuck him. Who does he think he is? How can he come from a nothing that we taught? We taught him everything he appears to deem more appropriate to forget, to this repulsive disgrace to humanity. Heroin. 200 grams? What on earth is this? What about the principles of decency, respect and honor? Has everything lost its worth now? Benny was clearly outraged as Zippy returned with the merchandise, and commenced a rhetoric appealing to the old ideals, which seemed long gone. These ideals really interested Benny when he was at a point where he may or would lose financially, sexually or in terms of superiority. On other occasions when Mr. Benjamin would leave the crime scene with a healthy wad in his back pocket, these principles appearing superfluous. He was right though, Colvin had gone too far, and basically laid the cards on the table that not only were the principles superfluous, but so were they. Benny continued, and you just stood by and took all this, you didn't say anything? He looked accusingly at Zippy. Zippy was a calm creature by nature, but was not prepared to stand for Benny's insinuation. Look at this. He pointed to the various marks left from his visit to Colvin's. What do you think? How did I get these? By saying thank you, Mr. Colvin. How kind you are to allow us to sell your heroin and risk being banged up for 15 years. If you could please rough me up a bit as well so I can genuinely realize how unworthy I am, then that would be the icing on the cake. Zippy finished, and there was a dreadful moment when Gore and Graham didn't know whether to laugh or not. Zippy did sarcasm well, and Benny knew a war of words with him would be futile. Thankfully, he stepped down. Look, I'm sorry mate, he said to Zippy. I had no right to say that. You're the one with the bruises after all. Mates. He gestured with his right hand that peace be made. Don't be a melodramatic queen. Zippy responded, making it clear that they were mates, but extracting the upper hand in the situation at the same time. I'm more worried about what we do with this. I, for one, have no intention of standing outside dilapidated comps selling smack to school kids. Even less desire do I have to do 15 years for it, if I'm lucky. You know what cops are like when it comes to drugs. All it needs is one bigoted pig with a 15-year-old daughter and down the stairs we go. Or, the other charming scenario is that other people sell the texture like sun round here, find out we're selling, and they inform us it isn't a market that doesn't embrace free market conditions. For these bad boys it's like Thatcherism never happened and nationalized industries rule. Of course, we refuse to sell and then Colvin comes after us. I despise being assaulted by children. His urchins disgust me. Zippy also was speaking the truth. Selling heroin was a shortcut to disaster. It also involved spending time transacting with consumers of the product who tended to displease the organization. Whereas you could sell the white moustache and Gary Ablitz to saucy, young rave things, the glamour of the leisure drug did not extend to heroin. Everyone present may possess works by Bowie, Pop and Reed, but Benny had the frog song by McCartney. That didn't mean he wanted to live in a pond. The question was what to do. Fuck him. I say we fuck him. Benny offered as an option. Benjamin, we knew you've been in some dark, cavernous places in your unscrupulous time, but are you prepared to have intercourse with Luton's Lucifer? Graham also enjoyed sarcasm, though more as a side dish, rather than a main. I mean, you funny, asexual freak, let's fuck him over. Inspired. I wish I'd thought of that. Zippy gestured again to his wounds. Well, what are we supposed to do then? Get jobs? You see? Gore can speak. Of course we don't get jobs. We hurt him. We take what's his and hurt him. When are we planning to go? 2, 3 weeks. How much have we going cash? 10 grand each. Benny answered the questions almost before finishing them, just to emphasize they truly were rhetorical. Graham started to think. They did have just over 40 grand in the bank. 10 each, hardly a lot to show for a life of crime. The funny thing was, they had always seemed to have loads of cash, but now, there was almost nothing to show for their toils. I say we nab the Armani lot. Nab it, take it to London, offload it and fuck off to Scotland. Lie low there and hit Spain. Tie up the final details from up north. Benny gave a look like they were all expected to congratulate him for the world's best idea. No one did. There were, not surprisingly, some doubts needing to be clarified. Steal from Colvin. He would kill us. It wouldn't work. He'd come after us. Graham was never the most adventurous in the group, but his common sense did appeal. Wrong. Benny, it transpired, was decided. He hasn't got the gear. Zippy said, Whittaker and Kelly have got it. If we steal it from them and keep them off the scene for a day or two, by the time Colvin finds out, we'll be well away. Colvin won't go outside Luton cause he's shite scared. He's not gonna go looking for us in London cause he knows we know too many people, and doesn't know what they are capable of. For one job that he loses he's not gonna send his lads over the country, and, I must stress, to outwit his boys is not the work of a genius. Once we get the stuff, we head down London early and it's all boxed off. There's loads of people who'd take it off our hands. Alright, we'll make less, but that's not the issue. We have to strike now. I can't go back to prison. Benny wasn't sure if a sarcastic comment would be too much to resist, but the silence prevailed. None of them wanted to do time again. Thief time wasn't exactly glamorous Noel Coward-style time, but it was better than heroin time. They'd end up users in there so they could be used as dealers once, or if they got out. They enjoyed the recreational side, and liked pretending they were still in their 20s when maybe they should know better, but heroin was a non-starter. We need a better plan. We need a plan. Graham interrupted. Excuse me, but you're a logistics man, aren't you? The superhero of the Excel sheet. Well, organize it. Make some phone calls. Do whatever you do. This is the only way. What do you say? Benny looked at the other three knowing he was right. 3 nods were taken as a sufficient majority for the motion to be carried. Now the question was how. Whittaker and Kelly were not the smartest creatures in town. They had been given the job purely for Colvin's entertainment. Despite Colvin's lack of style, sophistication, and general pertinence to the human race, his cash flow situation was beyond favorable. He could afford for 2 idiots to balls up a sale just to annoy the 4 old men he considered arrogant, not the word he used. Colvin assumed that the old men in question would never have the guts to call a mutiny. He judged people by his own intellectual standards, which meant that as he couldn't have thought up a plan like Benny's, no one else would. He also thought that Whittaker and Kelly would be able to move the Armani gear in a week, even those 2. In this way he would make his money back and take the piss out of, putting on a mocking voice, the organization. Whittaker and Kelly had a lock-up and shared a flat on the less salubrious side of town. It wouldn't take long for them to be tempted into an evening of free drugs and drink that would allow the boys to take the Armani gear. Graham was clear that it had to be that very evening, and they would have to be away within hours. This meant there would be no long goodbyes, not that there were many people to say goodbye to. Most parents had given up on their errant sons a long while back. Only Benny had a real tie to the town in the shape of his 10-year-old daughter Kylie. Kylie was fruit of Benny's most serious relationship. One where the word fidelity briefly became a watchword. Her mother, Sandra, was thought to have tamed the beast they called Benny, much to the horror of hormonally imbalanced 40-somethings in the local area. For a while he actually looked like he was going to settle down and make a home for his young family, but just before the birth his feet did itch and he requested some time to ponder this important step. Time, which was not available to Sandra, who went into labour holding her mother's hand and withstanding the jibes from the nurses, 2 of which had seen Benny's ceiling. On a number of occasions, even Benny has had barren patches, reconciliation was made and the electoral roll was temporarily changed, but not for long, as Benny's roving eye was also accompanied by equally, if not more so, roving genitalia. From those days on, Benny adhered to a school of parenting favoured in the late 20th century, sporadic payments of maintenance and oversized, inappropriate gifts at Christmas. From time to time, normally when one too many had been quaffed, he would claim that Sandra's new boyfriend, hard-working, loyal and genuine, had no right to claim he could father his child, and threatened to cease his existence should anything happen to his princess. Living in Luton didn't make him see her that often, so Marbella wouldn't really make that much difference. He thought about going round to see her, but considered it to be too potentially disrupting for her, in his magnanimous manner, convincing himself that it wasn't like he was never gonna see her again, and she'd love it over there on the beaches, playing in the sand and that. Then he remembered how good her mum looked with nice, all-over tan, and he was almost in the car, wondering which one he wanted to see, but desisted as time pressed. Gore and Zippy had no such matters to attend to, as their families had long since denounced them. Gore the elder will not be gracing the streets of Luton till affair, while after the Olympic flame had been extinguished in Beijing, and that's with good behaviour, which is never truly likely. Gore's parents were extremely middle class and were forced to abandon their leafy boulevard when their second son was incarcerated, rather hypocritically considering the time done by his father. Though that was glamorous when they left Luton, they left behind their son and moved somewhere which Gore believes to be up north, perhaps Scotland, or down south, maybe Devon. What he doesn't know is that the ashamed parents now tell their new friends that their two sons were taken from them in a dreadful road accident that is just too hideous to discuss. And then no one does. The only real love of Gore's life will not be saying goodbye to him, as she is now in a psychiatric institution after a flurry of suicide attempts. None of these were induced by Gore, but all thwarted by him, the most extravagant of which was when she consumed an entire A4 sheet of LSD. Visiting her would be probably as interactive as a meeting with his parents, so he let it be. Zippy's parents hadn't gone to the extents of convincing parishioners that their only born sold quality ladies' garments in the great celestial and eternal market, but a Christmas card was not expected by local bookmakers. When young Zippy himself was placed at Her Majesty's pleasure, there was talk of a revocation of the parents' golf club membership, as well as other privileges once the elaborate invitations stopped dropping onto the carpet. His parents also decided to move to newer, falser circles. There had been attempts at reconciliation, but all came to nothing due to a combination of Zippy's laziness and his parents' contempt. So, all Zippy and Gore had to do was get ready, a task that would be difficultly achieved in the time span offered by Graham. Graham had taken upon himself the role of making sure everything was ready for the big off the next day. The first job was assuring himself that all the parties' passports were in order and valid. Here came the first problem. Not surprisingly, Zippy had failed to renew his, despite the fact that the change had been a predominant topic of conversation between the four of them for the last 6 months. Zippy just never got round to doing it. Graham was not best pleased. It was 3 p.m. and they would have to be in the zone of luring Whittaker and Kelly before 8, as not to be seen by anyone who could gazump them. At 5 on the dot, Zippy was dragged down to the passport office, still questioning why Graham couldn't do it on his own, and the paperwork was completed. The bad news was it would take at least a week. This meant that a favour would be required. Graham had planned to leave without putting his mother through more misery, but now would have to pay her a visit so that she could pick up Zippy's passport and forward it on to Scotland. He also had to secure provisions for the journey, believing that the trip to Scotland to be of the most low-lying and to ground-going. He expected to provide enough essential material so that leaving their accommodation would be kept to a minimum. This proved slightly naive, as Benny would no doubt feel the need to sample the local ladies' wares, and even more worryingly, Zippy will have to make another addition to his ongoing drug compendium. Still, Graham hoped that common sense would prevail. He allocated every member of the party 20 kilograms of luggage to be placed into 4 rather attractive Adidas holdalls in different colors, recently purchased from a local sports shop. Each traveler would also be allowed an item of hand luggage to a maximum weight of 5 kilos, or 30 centimeters squared. If the other 3 though for a minute that Graham would not weigh and request the removal of items should their bags be overweight, then it would be clear that they were not as close to Graham as they had thought. His next stop was Boots, his favourite chemist. He had taken the time to inspect the bathroom of the other 2 as well as checking out Zippy's rather disinterested concern for personal hygiene, and allocated them 2 luxury grooming items each, as well as an aftershave. Added to this were 2 toothbrushes per person with accompanying paste. Here preferences were ignored in favour of practicality. Each also got 2 spray-on Sanex deodorants, a face towel, hand soap, wash and go 2-in-1, one for greasy hair for Gore, a bumper-sized pack of multivitamins, a 24-pack of Vanadium Extra, a large packet of Rennies, plasters, handy-pack tissues and nail clippers. These were neatly put into 4 tartan travel bags as he sat in a cafe and treated himself to a cappuccino. After that it was off to Poundland, where he picked up items the others would never think of, such as a tin opener, safety matches, lighters, blank CDs, sellotape, fuses, a screwdriver set, a foot pump, obligatory red triangles in case of accidents, and an Indiana Jones video. Finally, he stopped at Harford's and got a drill and a tent, and then told himself to stop. He got back home and placed the holdalls and travel bags on the floor and informed the others they could be collected. It was already knocking on 7 bells as they collected everything, and Graham still had to get his mum to do him the favour. It was decided that Zippy was a useless waster, and Graham would meet them later once the passport issue had been resolved. Graham insisted on being given the passports of Benny and Gore and putting them in a safe place. Then, he had to get showered and try and butter his mum up, a task which he didn't fancy. While the passport debacle was going on, the Gore and Benny household were busy packing, during which Gore hit upon his first major dilemma. His weight allowance had been calculated so that he would only be able to take with him 2 CD cases which held 96 in each one. This meant that Gore had to sum up his entire musical existence in 192 CDs. This was something that scared Gore, as the choice was beyond difficult. Everyone thought of Gore as a metaller. Benny was always calling him vastly amusing names like John Bon Jovi or other such pearls of wisdom. But there was a lot more to Gore than metal. Sure, he liked the rock, and built his musical reputation on the fine fundaments of the pioneers of what is now known as metal. But to fail to notice the eclectic nature of his collection was, in his eyes, blasphemy. From his metal roots, he soon expanded his knowledge to searching for the influences of the pioneers. He may have considered Motley Crue the best-dressed people in the late 80s, but didn't Benny and Zippy have the back of their mullets permed? Didn't Graham once turn up with black nail varnish on? Why was he always the butt of the musical jokes? He who feared not sandwiching Aretha between Def Leppard and the Scorpions on a compilation, he who brought Motown to Luton, he who was skitted at for listening to the Roses when they were digging Deacon Blue, and then laughed at for not wanting to go to Spike Island. He sat on his bed and wondered why visionaries suffered. However, time was passing and he was no closer to a solution. He was close to panicking. There were 30 or 40 that were superior to discussion, but then again, he might meet some like-minded person who would clearly have them anyway. Then he would be angry at himself for having been so obvious. Conversely, if he did meet a like-minded person and then was bereft of these titles, the impression it would give would be unthinkable. With the clock approaching 6, he had the first case full. Then he had the worry of which t-shirts to take. Clearly, he could not take a t-shirt by a band that had been excluded from the selection. There were many t-shirts that could be used as a conversation starter, or simply to evoke a look from across a crowded room to acknowledge good taste. Then he wondered whether there should be a limit to the number of CDs per artist. This was decided upon, and he once again had 11 spaces in the first case. By 10 to 7 he had managed to arrive at a selection which he detested, which made him look like a Philistine, which showed no imagination or education, but would have to do. Benny saw him pondering over the CDs and asked if he could put a few of his in the old CD cases. Benny laughed. Gore didn't. Gore would not transport the music of Benny in the same CD case as his own. Music for Benny was an extension of his need to have meaningless, false relationships, and, ergo, his music collection reflected this. The only time he listened to music was when Luther and Big Alex O'Neill were banged on to remove underwear. He also had an immense collection of things liked by women, just so the sneaky twat could look even better once they were in his lair. Gore never understood that, if they were in his bedroom anyway, surely they had made their decision to view his ceiling, so why the music? It was all part of the Benny theatre. Zippy and Graham had their musical moments too, that mainly followed the current trends without any real concern over greatness, modernity and vitality in this music place. Gore was aghast at how they could like a song simply because it sounded nice, without taking so many other factors into consideration. People told Gore that he worried too much about these things, with him responding that it was the only things truly worth worrying about. At 7 bells the bags were packed. Gore and Benny awaited the arrival of Zippy and tried to select a CD. Of course, he could now only select from the remaining list, which made him want to unpack his bag and start again. He knew this was not an option and went for something purely to annoy Benny, the toy dolls. Benny went off to search for 2 cold bottles when Zippy phoned him. As luck would have it, he bumped into a Taker and Kelly on the way out, and the pair said they would gladly take a drink with, and on, them.